But let's see what's going on in the world of sports today. Let's see who's available on a Friday. Everybody's going back to work now. I just shaved the other day. I got to shave again. That's what happens when you spot on my eye. I'm marked up like I've been in a fight. I ain't fought anybody except myself. Afternoon all. This is Coach Hall with Sports for Real. Got to come on and talk about the college football playoffs. We had some, for the most part, some great games over the quarterfinal round. Biggest surprise there is Oregon getting blown out. Everybody else dip and tuck. Penn State, the score looked like they blew them out, but the game was much closer than that. And you had the Texas-Arizona State game. That got pretty wild in the end there. And I got reasons why it resulted in the way that it did on several different fronts. And then yesterday, you had Georgia getting pushed around on the line of scrimmage by Notre Dame. When's the last time you've seen Georgia get pushed around up front, especially by a team not in the mighty SEC? But I got some more to say about that also. But given this playoff season, everybody is always jockeying to try to get a bye. But the question is, are the byes a blessing or a curse? As I look back over the NFL playoffs, and you got a much broader range of topics or teams to dissect, there have been a lot of teams over the years that hit the NFL playoffs running. But then they find a way to blow it. Esther Gutierrez says, hi, how you doing, Esther? Here from cool and sunny Florida, I guess. We got a little sunshine, but it's kind of cool outside. And next week they're talking about snow down here in Florida. It's been a long time since it snowed, but when it does snow, it hit the ground, and by the time it settles a little bit, it's already melted. That's how much snow we get down here. But that's what they're predicting next Friday the 10th, because there's a cold wave supposed to be heading down this way. So we'll see. Juliet says we have snow here in West Virginia. Yeah, you guys used to it. You got snow just like we got sunshine. So I guess they're going to swap for a minute. But I don't know yet. What do you think about Rich Rodriguez coming back to West Virginia? I don't know if you can follow yourself. And he made some enemies up there. So I guess the enemies that he had before, they're gone. So he's been welcome at this point back to West Virginia, which I think he should have stayed in the first place. Why do you hate it? Are you one of his enemies, or do you think that he was one of the reasons why the program went down in the first place? You got to admit, though, he made things exciting when he was there. Knocked off Georgia in the Peach Bowl, I think it was, and put West Virginia on a national stage there for a while. But, everywhere you go, you're going to make some enemies, and I think that's what happened to him. So the fact that they brought him back, it lets me know that those people, they're probably not there anymore. But back to the NFL, there's been lots of teams that have gone in with the top seed, and they got their rest, and they came back and they took care of business. But there have been a whole bunch of other teams who got a number one seed or a bye, and they didn't perform so well. So I've always had this question, is the bye what you really want? He is make all the players transfer. So all the players are transferring from West Virginia right now? You think he's going to make them transfer, or they're already transferring? What do you mean by that? With the portal just closing last week, he still has an opportunity to pick up some players later. But I think because of the playoffs and everything all jumbled together, they're going to have to make some changes because what's going on right now doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And they're going to kind of do what they do down here in high school in Florida. You can transfer, you can play your rival next week and transfer to that rival and play again. That's kind of how dumb it is down here. So Nails Zuna say I subscribe. I appreciate it. It's kind of dumb for you to be able to play your rival one week and then transfer to play with them the next week and it be allowed. But I think what's going to happen now, because you have players transferring during the playoffs, it's going to get to the point where it's like a free agency period in the NFL where I can pick up a guy whose season is over with, he comes to our team, and then he helps us in the playoffs. That's what's coming next if they don't put a stop to it. So like Steve Sarkisian came up with the idea that they should put traditional spring practice and push it back. Therefore, it gives everybody time to reset and scramble and see what they have, and it's pretty fair for everybody. But right now, the teams that play in the first round of the playoffs, they're at a tremendous disadvantage because they're strictly focused on trying to get ready for that first round game while everybody else is getting new players to add to their program. But when you get a bye, I think for several reasons in college football, it's not a good thing. If you played in the quarterfinals and you didn't get one of those top 4 seeds, you had an opportunity to play on campus. That made a big difference with Notre Dame. It made a big difference with Ohio State. You get that crowd behind you, and even though, other teams get a chance to get a good portion of those tickets, it's nothing like playing on your home field. And you saw that with Ohio State. Now, Penn State, same thing. If that game against SMU had been played in a different location where it wasn't so cold, I think you would have seen a different performance out of SMU's quarterback. But that environment clearly made a difference. So if you have a home game in that first round, I think it's better than getting a bye. Because take Oregon, for instance. If you look at that Oregon game, it took them almost a half to get going. And they looked just like they looked in the beginning of the season. If you think way back, the first couple games, Oregon, they couldn't get it together. They just sloshed through everything, and it just wasn't hitting on all cylinders. And all of a sudden, boom, they were running through everybody. It took them a while to get going. They were on the path to doing that against Ohio State, but they fell so far behind, it wasn't nothing going to be good that happened for them. And I think the bye hurt Oregon because Ohio State had a chance to play a game, get their confidence back, and take that momentum and take it into Oregon. They played 2 games in the same span that Oregon played 1, and it slowed Oregon down a whole lot. Same thing with Boise State. Same thing with Arizona State. But in Arizona State's case, I think their slow start can be attributed more so to their coaching staff. Every time they got down, where they had an opportunity to try to score, Dillingham chose to go for it, and they got stuffed a couple of times when they could have made a field goal attempt. Now, granted, their field goal team hasn't done that great this year. They even had one blocked against Texas. But if you could have got one of those field goals made, then it was no need for Arizona State to get into overtime. They would have had more points. They would have been in closer contact. And when they finally got to rolling in that second half there, after that, bye rust, they were in prime position to knock off Texas. But the bye clearly killed them. And then when you have poor coaching, that's another reason. And on the subject of Arizona State, you got Texas 4th and 8. And all you got to do is get a stop. Keep them from getting the first down. Now, all during the game, they've had the outside people winning the battles against the Sun Devils secondary. But for whatever reason, the ball got deflected, or he underthrew them, or something happened and went out of bounds. Why would you expose those same corners in a one-on-one situation when the game is on the line, knowing that you can't cover them? So instead of blitzing like they did, they should have dropped 8. If they had dropped 8, then Texas, they would not have won that game. Arizona State would have won in the first overtime. But be that as it may, Dillingham is going to go back and look at the tape and look how close we were. But it just goes to show you how the bye has slowed all these teams down. Now, Georgia, they were in a position where the bye should have helped them because they were coming in with a backup quarterback. Now, My keys to that game was, can Georgia run the football well enough for the quarterback to hit a few passes downfield? If they were able to run the football, they beat Notre Dame. But if they struggled running the football like they did, it was going to come down to Stockton. Can Stockton make some plays? He made a few plays in the first half, but they put so much pressure on him, it was hard for him to get settled. And the unthinkable happened. Notre Dame whipped Georgia up front. Nobody could see that coming, especially a guy like a Cam Newton. He's talking about nobody wants to see Notre Dame because they're not relevant. Now, let's examine that for a second. If I'm a playoff team and I've never won anything before, this is the first time I've ever been on this stage in my life. Nobody's ever heard of me. He's making the statement about optics. Because I haven't been there, he's saying nobody's really interested in seeing me play there. Well, if you think that's small, then of course. But if I play my way on this stage and I beat the team that you think is so superior because they're from this superior conference, then who do they want to see? The team that beat your beauty team or the team that defeated them? I think the answer there is obvious. And this is the problem that the people in the SEC have. They think just because the games are so close and they got 100,000 people in the stands that the rivalries are so deep that nobody else can compete with that. Well, maybe in the regular season they can't. But if I'm from the moon and I got a good football team, I don't care where I go to play or who or where you came from. And Notre Dame clearly could care less that Georgia came from the SEC. But speaking of the SEC, let's talk about them a little bit more. How are they faring so far? The mighty conference that's supposed to dominate everybody all the time. They have this marvelous out-of-conference record. And they're going to show everybody that we're going to have a SEC championship game. Even after all the playoffs and everything else, we're going to show just how dominant we are. And when they didn't get no more than 3 teams, what do? They go to social media and they start complaining and crying. Why don't the SEC have more teams? How can Alabama get left out over SMU? Why is Tennessee having to go to Ohio State? And on and on and on and on. Then SMU gets blown out. More talking. You see what I'm saying? Even Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss coach, he chimes in talking about, why aren't we in the playoffs? Well, the obvious is this. You didn't take care of business when you had a chance to take care of it. Evander Holyfield said it best. The object of a boxer is to get in the ring and knock his opponent out. If you don't knock your opponent out, then you leave it to the judgment of others. Well, Ole Miss, they got beat by Kentucky, which they weren't supposed to beat. And then late in the season, when they counted the most, they lost to Florida on the road. So you dropped outside of the top 12. The biggest problem that Ole Miss had was Clemson came back and upset SMU in the conference championship game. That pretty much put number 12 Clemson in, who had no other prayer to get in the playoffs except to win the conference. That knocked out a team. It probably knocked out Alabama. Then Ole Miss, they had a chance to take care of business just like Alabama. They lost to teams they shouldn't have lost to. They got blown out by Oklahoma. They got beat by Vanderbilt. And all these teams had the chance to take care of business. Now, when Alabama being left out, you think that they're going to come and go to the Michigan game and they're going to whip up on Michigan. Well, Michigan had other ideas, but it just goes to show you about the strength, the true strength of the SEC. Michigan, they have no quarterback. They play great defense. They can run the football, but quarterback, no. And because you don't have a quarterback, you should be able to devise a game plan to stop the run well enough to get off the field and win the game. You did that at times, but then you also turned the ball over. And then you have your quarterback, Milroe, who's supposed to be a draft choice, top draft choice in the NFL, if he decides to go, and he lays an egg. Well, Alabama gets beat by lowly Michigan. And then a couple hours later, Illinois knocks off South Carolina. So all the heavyweights in the SEC they seem to tumble. Why is that? I hadn't been able to figure it out. Can you help me figure it out? Why is the SEC losing when it's supposed to be so dominant? And the odd thing about it is, when these teams lose, you don't hear anything about it. They try to sweep it under the rug. Why are people trying to sweep SEC losses under the rug? Every time SEC wins, everybody's on TV bragging, oh, look how powerful the SEC is. Look how great they are. These other conferences don't stand a chance. Now, to go with that, I will reiterate my stance about the SEC. They are built just like every other conference in the nation. You got 2 or 3 teams at the top, you got 2 or 3 teams at the bottom, and the rest in the middle. And then when you take all those teams and mix them up in a bag and shake it up, then you pull it out and you get parity, just like you have with the college football playoffs. But the SEC is proven to be not as strong as people say they are. Now, there are different levels in sports, and I'm not going to describe that because I don't want to put that down in paper. But when you have 2 teams that are equal to each other, I don't care if they're 0-12. They're going to have a great game. But if you take a 0-12 team and put them up against a team that's 12-0, most of the time, that 12-0 team is going to obliterate that losing team because they're on different levels. So it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're on the same level as somebody, you're going to be able to compete with them. And that is the first objective of sport. You have to be able to be competitive with your opponent if you ever have any hope of trying to defeat them. Kenneth Porter say LSU won. Yes, they did win. They struggled a little bit. Baylor tried to come back, but LSU was just a little bit too strong for them. By no means am I putting down the SEC. Grew up around here, and I know all these teams pretty much like the back of my hand. But I've never been convinced that one conference has been so dominant that everybody in this conference can go and dominate any other conference. And you take a guy like Lane Kiffin, he going around crying like a little coward. He's trying to show up Duke because Duke's supposed to have the best defense in the ACC, and he wanted to show everybody how much more dominant his team is over that ACC team. Well, the problem is Duke is depleted just like everybody else. They're not that much better than Duke. Even last night, Duke had opportunities to put more points on the board than they actually did. Now, they never slowed Ole Miss, and this is the Ole Miss team that a lot of people expected to see, but every team has different matchup differences to go against another opponent. And just so what happens in this particular game, they were head and shoulders better offensively over Duke's defense, that they can pretty much do what they want. Now, you see in the end there, Kiffin is supposed to be getting on his quarterback, Jackson Dart, for throwing that touchdown pass when the game was well out of hand. You can't convince me that that's authentic. He probably told Dart to check that off and score another touchdown to end his career like that. But he tried to play it off like Dart did that on his own. I don't think that is the case. He's trying to embarrass Duke and the college football playoff committee because they got left off. Now, the only thing about it is not once has Lane Kiffin taking responsibility for the games that they lost. They lost 3 games, man. And if you lose 3 games, like Holyfield said, you leave it up to the committee to determine where you go. Now, what happens in the future, I don't know. I think what has to happen is they need to take those buys and reduce them. For Oregon to sit around for 3.5 weeks waiting on a top team like Ohio State, I think the game should happen a little sooner. And if Oregon just sat around a week less, they would not have gotten blown out by Ohio State like that. It's just that Ohio State had worked out the kinks against Tennessee, and it put them in position to jump on Oregon the way they did. I tell you guys all the time, if you beat me the first time, I'm going to look at the tape and I'm going to find out what's the main thing you did to beat me, and I'm going to make adjustments to try to stop that moving forward. And that's what Ohio State did. They made all the adjustments, and then you add to the fact that Oregon was simply rusty, then it got ugly. Now, not just Ohio State. Take the other 3 games. All 3 of those teams that had byes, they were in a position to get blown out. Georgia, they fell behind 20-3. A couple things happened to them, but they still fell down 20-3. Boise State, they fell down. That running back, first drive of the game, Jinty, he had a chance to pop through the left side on the first series of the game. He missed a hole. That would have changed the entire complexity of the game, but he wasn't in rhythm. And Arizona State, look how long it took them to get going. Each one of those bye teams were in a position where they had to make a play or they were going to get blown out. Oregon was the only team that got blown out. Everybody else made the play, and they started to get into a rhythm because they had to. They were at the point of no return, and Oregon is the only one that didn't get that. But if you look at Oregon at the beginning of the season, it took them about 3 weeks to get going, and the same thing, the same way they looked then is the same way they look in the first 2.5 quarters against Ohio State. Rod Montgomery, really it's only been Ohio State and Michigan that has won national championships in the past 10 to 15 years. All others have been SEC teams. You are correct. I never said that the SEC was not dominant. I said that the dominant team from the SEC has won the championships. They have been the dominant, the ones at the top. But you still have 2 or 3 teams at the top, 2 or 3 teams at the bottom, and the rest are in the middle. Of those 2 or 3 teams, SEC has been the better teams in a lot of those cases in the last 10 to 15 years. You are correct. But that doesn't mean that other teams could not play with them. Now, here's the thing about this now. If you look at the college football playoffs, no longer can you say, I'm the best conference, so I should deserve to be in the championship game. Take the year when LSU played Alabama. Because they played in that 9-3 game or whatever it was, automatically people assume that these are the best teams. So we're going to pick these 2 to go play in the national championship, with the key word being pick. You pick the 2 teams. But if you had a college football playoff all alone, then I think you would have different outcomes than the SEC dominating all the time. Same thing in well, it's a little different now in the FCS. You got the same teams seem to be playing against each other right now. It's really only 2 conferences there. The HBCUs, they can amass the talent to compete there, but they need money, so they don't want to go to the playoffs because the playoffs, there's no real gain there for them to go to the playoffs. There's no money there, so they want to try to get every cent they can get. And but yeah, these playoffs, they open in a lot of people's eyes, and if you got any kind of sense of balance, then you can see that all these teams, they really have a good chance to win the championship. You know, these 4 teams that's going to the semifinals has an opportunity to win the national championship. Now, Georgia didn't have their quarterback, and that hurt them. And they're on an equal plane with Texas. And Texas, they really should have lost against Arizona State. Arizona State pretty much controlled the whole game. It's just that when they got down in the scoring position, I think the coach, he kind of panicked and didn't have any confidence in his players that they can stick around. I gave the preview of that game. I said that if Arizona State can stick around to around halftime and be in close contact, they would be fine. They were better than what I thought they were, but the problem with that was Dillingham, he tried to run into the teeth of the Texas defense, which is those big guys, those 2 tackles they got there. You're not running in there. Ask Texas A&M, they'll tell you about that. You can't do it. And early in the game when they were fresh, they really couldn't run up in there. And not trying to kick a field goal even though you had one blocked. If you had just made one field goal attempt when you were down there those 2 or 3 times, then I think that would have made a difference. And the fact that, they didn't make the right defensive coverage call, they tried to blitz on 4th and 8 instead of dropping back. And they didn't get to the quarterback in a timely fashion, and they got burned. So you can't keep thinking you can get a whole lot of opportunities, and you keep blowing them and expect to stay in the game. And that's what happened to Arizona State. But one thing's for sure, once you got to the quarterfinals, there were no pretenders there. All those teams that were there should have been there. So regardless of what Lane Kiffin had to say, SMU is gone, but the team that you thought, Alabama, they would have been gone too. And if Ole Miss would have trotted up to Ohio State, they would have got kicked in the head too. So I really don't see the point of Lane Kiffin continually to cry and then try to embarrass Duke by running up the score last night. All right, the present SEC teams are pass happy. No teams are physical. That's something the SEC used to be. Well, that's the way football used to be in general. I still think that teams like Georgia, they want to run the football, not necessarily Florida trying to get modernized like everybody else. But speaking of that physicality, let me tell you guys something I picked up while I was coaching. Let me give you an example. We were going to play this team that could not stop the run. I mean, you talk about tissue soft. They were worse than tissue soft. They were dollar store tissue soft. I mean, we played a team, was our rival, actually played them before we did. So they always got to the game before we did. And what they would do, they lined up on the center and they had 2 or 3 plays, both sides, and that's all they did. This team that they were playing, they'd run the ball 2-3 times, 80 yards, touchdown. 2-3 plays, 80 yards, touchdown. So I said, Coach, we're going to run the football this week, right? He said, yeah, we're going to run the football. Well, at the time, he wanted to be like everybody else. He wanted to stand up in the shotgun and then hand the ball to the back. Well, a lot of people don't realize there is a difference. If I line up on the center, the back is taking off toward the hole, I hand it to him, he's got a rate of speed. But in the shotgun, I take the snap, then I hand it to the back, then he tries to pick a hole. Zone blocking. Well, it gives the defense a better opportunity when you're in the shotgun trying to run between the tackles, because when they get on the block, they can get their eyes, shed the block and get to the football. But by the time the back gets to the hole, they're still engaged into the block if you're under center. And this is what I was trying to tell this guy. He's a head coach, and I don't know how he got to be a head coach, but a lot of these head coaches in high school, you'd be surprised. But as soon as I told this guy, look, man, we need to run the football from under center, he didn't want to listen to me. So the athletic director just happened to be up in the booth with me. So I told him, I said, Coach, would you tell this guy to run the ball under center between the tackle? We started doing that. Man, we put a running clock on those people in less than a quarter. Now, if he had done that, if he had seen the film, he would have known that he would have been able to do that if he was a qualified coach. But he wasn't qualified. A lot of these guys are just like that in high school football. And I'm seeing the same thing in college. You know, those guys get off the block, they find the football, but if you line up on the center, it makes it easier to run the football. Arizona State started doing that against Texas, and they started having a little bit more success. And when the game was on the line, they were able to move the football. It's just that the coaching staff blew that. But Georgia, that game went just like I thought it would. I picked Notre Dame to win. Picked the parlay. I picked Notre Dame. They was plus 3.5. I thought that would be a close game, but it was going to come down to could Notre Dame stop Georgia's run and could Stockton make enough throws without the running game to beat Notre Dame. Well, those two things played out just like that, but what I couldn't see happening was Notre Dame being able to control the line of scrimmage and pretty much just run the clock out toward the end there. And it's surprising to a lot, but, you know, with everybody's moving around now, these players, they aren't loyal. And let me tell you something else, Mr. Montgomery. My dad-in-law, he tells me, he noticed that a lot of these defensive backs, they don't want to come up and make a tackle. So I started paying a little closer attention to that, and he's right. How can you get blocked on the goal line, and the running back is on the 5, and by the time the back gets to the goal line, you are still not coming up to make the tackle? So what the man said made absolute sense. You got a lot of DBs out there that don't want to come up and make a hit. So this is what I call the watering down of football, and it's taking an effect on teams all the way across the board. Now, NFL, you won't see a whole lot of that, but you see it sometimes there too. You can't hit a guy coming across the middle without the possibility of getting flagged, and the physicality has just been taken out of the game. And I got a problem. Rod says, I'm an Auburn fan, and I'm beyond frustrated with Freed. 15 carries for Hunter is crazy. Well, you got to know that Freeze is still a pretty good coach now. You can't give up on Freeze. Now, if he comes back this year and he starts to beat around the bush, then I think Freeze, you got to go back to Liberty somewhere. He had it going at Ole Miss, and he blew it up there. And if you don't get it right, you're going to run him out of Auburn, too. And then once you get 2 opportunities in the SEC, they're not going to bring you back for a third time. So, yeah, but I can understand why Freeze would frustrate you. And the SEC is traditionally a run-the-football type league, and now everybody wants to spread you out and throw the football. And what's ironic about it all, when Steve Spurrier first come to the SEC from Duke, they say, well, you can't do that kind of stuff here in the SEC. And lo and behold, he said the SEC on his ear. And now everybody wants to try to duplicate the same thing. But I don't care what kind of league you're in, what state, it all comes down to in football, you got to be able to run the football, man. If you can't run the football, at some point, all that throwing around, even if you can throw it around, the weather's going to get you. Take Dan Fouts and the San Diego Chargers when they went to Cincinnati, when it was the wind chill was like -30. You can't throw the football like that, man. You could have had the all-time receivers on this team with the best line in the world. But if the wind's going to take you past, you can't get it down the field. You got to run the football, man. And when you hear coaches talking about we're going to we're going to travel, or put together a team that can travel, what they're saying is we're going to be able to play good defense and run the football. If you can't do that, you can't win, man. And when you see these semifinal games, that's what the Penn State and Notre Dame game is going to be like. I don't think Penn State's going to be able to pop that running back through there like they did the first 2 rounds. It's going to be tough sledding for Katron. And Notre Dame, their defensive front has gotten better. Their weakness, they were giving up like 180 yards rushing during the season. And I don't see it happening I don't see Penn State being able to run through them like they did these last 2 games. So these next 2 games are going to be like throwbacks. And I tell you what you're going to start hearing, Mr. Montgomery. If you recall, say like 30 years ago, when a team from the SEC or the South went up to the North, the statement was they're going to show those Southern boys how to play football, because in the Big Ten type of play with the weather and all that kind of stuff, you pretty much have to run the football. And Florida team just had a little bit more flair than that. So they say that they're going to show the Southern boys how to play football. Well, you're going to start hearing more of that kind of stuff now, especially with Michigan beating Alabama and Georgia getting beat by Notre Dame. So you're going to start hearing stuff you used to hear 30, 40 years ago about the strength of the northern teams. But I don't think it makes a difference where you come from. Many times I've seen USC go into the North and whip a whole bunch of teams up there, but they don't talk their Big Ten crap like they used like that once that happens. But the SEC, I think they're going to be okay. But I think they're going to have to realize that everybody else can play some football too. Take Florida, for instance. The best thing really that could happen to Florida was to start playing a tougher schedule. For years, they were high behind the SEC. They would not have to, you have to be balanced. They would not be able to hide behind the SEC's strength anymore. They're going to have to step out and start playing teams. When they played Oklahoma in that championship game a few years back, people seemed surprised about why Florida had never come across Oklahoma. Well, they hadn't come across Oklahoma because they don't step off the porch to play anybody. Now, they played Texas this year only because Texas is now in the SEC. The last time they played Texas was exactly 1 year before Pearl Harbor. Texas came to Gainesville and shut them out. And they didn't play them again for 80 years. Because Florida, they will not play you unless they feel like they can beat you. But now that you're pretty much forced to play a tougher schedule with Oklahoma and Texas in the conference, the SEC now mandates that you have to play another Power 4 team outside the conference. Now, I don't know if they're going to change that rule because of what Alabama is complaining about the scheduling. They're saying, why play a tough schedule if it's going to penalize me? And I don't know. You might have a good point there. But Alabama, Kalen DeBoer, you're going to have to tighten up because you got people already calling for his job. And I don't know why. You can't run your offense through your quarterback and put your running back on the back burner. That's true. I think Miro is a good example of that. If Miro can't run the football, then it's hard for him to throw the ball. And then you already based your game plan on the fact that you're going to get your quarterback to run the ball. And that don't work so well a lot of times. And Miro, he's declared for the NFL draft. I don't think Miro's ready for the NFL. I think it would be wise for him to rescind that and come on back and compete with that number one recruit quarterback they got coming into Alabama and get a little bit better. But right now, I don't think Miro is ready for the NFL. They see him like a Lamar Jackson, but yeah, you can move the football, but the problem I have with Jackson, he hadn't shown me when the game is on the line, he can put it in there. So that's the only gripe I got with him. Can you throw the football when it counts the most? And he hadn't shown me he can do that. And Derrick Henry is a godsend for him, but Derrick Henry, I don't know if he's going to be able to have those big holes like he had in the regular season. Kansas City showed you how to stop Baltimore last year. You got to stop the run between the tackles first. Then when Lamar pulls it and tries to get around the corner, you have to cut that cone off. And then if they can't run and he can't run, he got to stand back there and throw it. The odds aren't in your favor there, pal. So get all the accolades you want, win all the MVP awards you want, but it still come down to can you throw the football when it counts the most for any quarterback, and he hadn't shown me he can do it. And Miro is the same type of player. He hadn't shown me he can do it. Now, he'll keep you in the game, but that's college. And it's like my thing about Shedeur Sanders. These college guys chasing him down and beating him up. I'm wondering what's going to happen when he gets to the pros. Are he going to be able to escape them? And it looks like to me he's going to get picked up by Tennessee with the second pick. That's if Tennessee don't find a way to win a game like the Giants did last week. The Giants had it made, man. All they had to do was fold for the last 2 weeks, and they would have had the number one pick. But somehow, some way, they beat the Colts, and that dropped them out of that number one spot. Pushed New England up, and Tennessee has the 2 spot right now. So what it looks like to me is that New England, I thought they were going to take Travis Hunter. But the way that guy Scatterboo played the other day, he might just be going to New England. He looks like a cold weather type player anyway. So it all depends on what New England does that determines where Travis Hunter goes. But with the second pick, I can see Sanders going to Tennessee. And if Scatterboo does go to New England, that might take Travis Hunter and put him down to Jacksonville. Had to be interesting to see how all that turns out. But the playoffs really start tomorrow. With the AFC North, you have Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. And that's really a tough game because really Cincinnati is probably the team nobody wants to play. So they're rooting that your Steelers, Montgomery. Hey man, look here, man. Let me show you this here, man. I'm talking about your Steelers. My Steelers, man. I don't know if you can see that, but that's what that is. That's a Steelers shirt, man. We're going to whip Baltimore if we catch them next time. But Pittsburgh is typical. I've been with the Steelers over 45 years, man. And they always find a way to make things more interesting than they have to be. But I think that Pittsburgh, if they stop turning the ball over, they'll be fine. But we need to take care of Cincinnati and get them on out the way because that's a team nobody really wants to face in the playoffs. They lost a lot of close games during the regular season, and eventually things just might turn their way. But I think they're just a little bit too out with the equations to make the playoffs. But Pittsburgh can put it into that by going and knock them off tomorrow. Now, I think it all depends on what happens with the first game. The Ravens, they have to play. They can't afford to sit anybody. Now, if it was reversed and Pittsburgh played early and lost, then they can sit everybody. But Baltimore is going to have to show up and play. Now, the thing with that is, Baltimore has already lost to Cleveland. So this is not a guarantee that they're going to beat the Browns. And, you know, those two organizations are pretty much mirror images of each other in the fact that the Ravens were spawned from the old Browns. when they moved to Baltimore, and then they created the new Browns with a new franchise. So it was really, they're related in a lot of ways, and they don't like each other. And I think what's going to happen is, I don't think that Baltimore is going to beat them by 20 points, but they're going to have to play well enough to win this game. But if they get a decent lead and they can coast out to the end, then I think that Baltimore will start sitting some of their players. But they're going to have to win this game, because if they don't, it's going to come down to whether or not Pittsburgh can get by Cincinnati. And it might just be to Pittsburgh's best interest to lose, because then they will go to Houston in the first round. And Houston, they're not playing that great right now. So I think Pittsburgh would be better off just going on to Houston. But it would be nice if they can win that division. But Cincinnati is a tall order. They can beat Cincinnati, but it ain't guaranteed. So that spot there, and Miami, if they win, they're going to need Denver to lose. And if Miami loses, Denver loses, and Pittsburgh loses to Cincinnati, that will put the Bengals in. But it don't look good for the Bengals, because Kansas City, with that top seed, they're going to sit most of their players. And because they're sitting most of their players, that gives Denver an excellent opportunity to get into the playoffs, which takes me back to the topic at hand. Is a bye good for a playoff team? Well, I think with Kansas City, it might be in their advantage to play some of their starters this week, because they hadn't been playing that great anyway. They're starting to play a little bit better, but that will be 3 weeks, kind of like Oregon, them sitting around and seeing what's going to happen. I'm going to be glued too. Well, I got to go to a basketball game first, you know, basketball and football in the same sentence. There's no comparison there. But I'm supposed to be assistant coach here, so I got to go show up. I'm the film guy, so I'll put it out there for him. So I got to show up to that. But luckily, that's a 4 o'clock game. I got a game this afternoon, or this evening, I should say. So I got to do my duties, but football and basketball, there's no comparison. Because I tell them like this, and the basketball people, they hate me for it. But I tell you anyway, basketball is just something to do until football comes back around. Now, speaking of that, I got to make this comment. You know the guy from Oregon, the quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, before the championship game, before the game against Ohio State, he made the statement that they should make it where football is always played in good weather games. He's advocating that they build domes and arenas that keeps out the weather. Well, when he said that, he kind of lost me, because that's what basketball is for. Basketball is for people who don't want to get wet and don't want to deal with the cold and the elements. They want to sit there and look nice and pretty and watch the game. I say forget that. If you're a football purist and you're playing the game, then I think you should get out there in all the elements and play the game. Pittsburgh and Cleveland the first time, that was great. I can only imagine what it's like to play in the snow, but that's been one of the things as a player I will have wanted to do, was to get out there and play in the snow. But these young players, that's just the illustration of how they all feel. You can also do wrestling. Well, I guess you could do wrestling, but it's not football. Football is king, man. Football is the only thing that matters, at least to me. And a lot of people think just like me. I'm a football guy, and I'll always be a football guy. And I'm up for this head coaching job. If I get that, we're going to run the football. So any of our future opponents out there, and you see me, and I'm on the other sideline, you best believe we're going to run the football right at you. There won't be no second guessing. It's going to be old school football. Yeah, we're going to throw the ball a little bit, but it's going to be a whole lot of play action, and it's going to be a whole lot of running between the tackles. So that's what it's going to be. But that's just me. So what do you guys think? Do you think that football is always better? Do you think college football should adjust the buys, or should there be a buy at all for playoff teams? If it's up to me, I say put 16 teams in the playoffs. That way you have 4 rounds. and one plays 16 and so on and so forth with no reseeding, and play the first 2 rounds on campus. And I think that would be a good option. And then you would have teams like Alabama and Ole Miss. They would have a reprieve. They might go in as 15 to 16 seed, but at least they'll have a shot in the playoffs. You love the 49ers offense? Which 49ers offense? You talking about Joe Montana or what they're doing now? If you look at Kittle, they're using that tight end. They flex him out to the wide receiver a little bit, but for the most part, there's a lot of similarities in what Montana did to what they're doing now. I like the way they run that offense with San Francisco, especially when you got a guy that can run the ball like McCaffrey. But the question is, can you keep him on the field? And they're questioning Purdy's ability now, and I don't know why. When the guy was winning, it was great, but now when his team is struggling, people want to question it. I don't think Purdy should be questioned about his level of play. West Coast offense, yeah, what you're seeing now is a newer version of it. Quarterback is running a lot more often. But if you think about it, what Steve Young did is pretty much what they're doing now. Nobody's open, take off. There's a price to pay when he did it. Not so much now. You slide and got breathed on you wrong, they're going to call a penalty on him. But back then, Steve Young come around that corner, we go catch it. I'm seeing Singletary put shoulders on what that guy from was it Mike Pallure from the Cowboys? Knocked him out 2 years in a row on the same kind of play. So there's no love for a quarterback. And when I see these guys crumple to the ground and look like, the guy just barely touched you and you act like he killed you, that is nothing, man. You're right. The running game is always going to be key in football. You're going to have to be able to run the football. Penn State, and who's Penn State playing? Notre Dame. That's going to be a slobber knocker. And Ohio State, you got to find a way. That's going to be more of a passing type game with Sarkisian against Chip Kelly. And it's going to come down to who can make a play on that. They're acting like this guy Smith is uncoverable. He ain't uncoverable. What they're doing is moving him around in different positions, trying to hide him and get matchups with different backs and things. So I think that if a defense can step up and put a hit on Smith, and they can beat Ohio State. Howard's playing pretty good right now, but they don't have. I don't think they're running the ball that great. They're running well enough because when you get to focusing on the passing game, then that opens up holes in the running game. So it's just like any other team. You got to pick one and take that away. And I think what you need to do is put a bracket on Smith and concentrating on stopping that run, and you can slow Ohio State down. If that don't work, all you got to do is pull out the Michigan tape. As well as Ohio State's playing, they played that well most of the season. And all it takes is a scheme and the right personnel, and you can slow any team down. So if Texas is serious about getting by Ohio State, first thing they need to do is see what Michigan did to them. And no, it wasn't a fluke. The fluke is that Michigan played well enough on offense to win that game. And Ohio State, they couldn't shake them. And if they couldn't see them coming, and for a team that you put up on your bulletin board and got a running countdown to the start of the game next year, if you can't see them coming, who are you going to see coming? So Texas, I think it's to their advantage to have only a week before this game takes place, and it's going to be a lot closer than what people think. Now they're talking like Ohio State, since they got the most expensive roster out there, that they should be playing like it. Well, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to win this game. Rod says that 3 safety look gave Oregon the blues. Well, what they were doing, when they couldn't hit those quick passes, then Gabriel would take off. What Ohio State did was put a spy on him. And then when the quarterback seen the spy, he take a few steps up like he's trying to run, then he notices the spy, then he pulls the ball down, and he tries to do something else. Well, if you're going to run the football, at some point, you're going to have to put a shoulder pad on the guy and try to run him over or something, or at least try. But he didn't attempt to do that. It was almost like he forgot how good their offense was, and he played right into Ohio State's hands. Don't get it wrong. Ohio State is playing some good football, but at the same time, they ain't invincible. They can be beat, and Texas can do it, but Texas cannot play the way they've been playing. But one thing that Texas has that I don't care if they were 0-12, Texas is going to have speed, and they're going to be able to match up with Smith on the outside there. It's just a matter of can they get to the quarterback to put enough pressure on him to slow that offense down, and I think they can do it. Now, Tennessee, they didn't play that bad against Ohio State. It's just that they tend to make the same mistakes they always make when they play in a big game. I don't think they have the right schemes. Matter of fact, the Ohio State guy came out and said that everything they saw on tape from Tennessee, every situation that they saw, that's what Tennessee tried to do in that game. So that let you know that the coaching is all right, but they didn't make any adjustments. Ohio State made the adjustments, man. And just as great as these players are, it still comes down to coaching. And a lot of these guys that you think are so great because they in these big schools, they aren't the greatest of coaches, man. It's like the great Billy Joe said, my college coach. He had a little problem with Eddie Robinson from Grambling. He had took a team into Grambling that wasn't supposed to beat Grambling, and he whipped them. And they had a 2-year contract. Well, after they beat Grambling, Robinson dropped the second game. And he said it always bothered him. But the comment he made about Robinson, he said he might be the winningest, but that doesn't mean he's the greatest. And that's what you're seeing now. A lot of these coaches, they're running these great programs, but they don't make the decisions that are great. Look at Dillingham at Arizona State. I think he's the reason why that team lost that game. Much more so than what the players did during the game. All right, you have to commit to the run. You got to commit to the run, man. But Oregon, they were off their game, man, and Ohio State had the advantage of playing that week before them. A lot of people were trying to make excuses for Oregon as to why they had to play Ohio State in that first round. Well, you had to play them eventually. It doesn't matter when you play them, right? You whipped them before, right? Okay, so what's the problem when you play them in the second round? I think that the bye was too long. That hurt Oregon, but they got no other excuses as to why they lost that game. So I'm not making any excuses for them. You got beat. Go get you another quarterback next year and try again. But you got no excuses, man. So the thing that I'm looking at, the SEC, they were very, 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 very close to not having any teams making it into the semifinal rounds. Whereas in the past, they would have taken a team from the SEC and stuck them right into the championship game. If you had these playoffs years ago, then the list of champions will look a whole lot different than what they look right now. But I got no gripes. It's been a great season, and it's going to get even greater in these next couple games. We don't have to wait that long. Next Thursday is when they're going to play the semifinal rounds, and then you got the NFL playoffs kicking off right behind that. So beginning with tomorrow, you have the playoffs pretty much where teams are jockeying for position, and you still have a couple of games up for grabs. You got the Bucks and the Panthers. The Bucks and the Falcons. One of those two are going to get that final spot. If the Bucks win, they're in the playoffs. If they lose and Atlanta wins, then Atlanta goes. So it's a lot to be decided. You got Green Bay and Chicago. It depends on how Chicago does in that game, but Green Bay, their seeding could be affected by that. And then you got the headliner, Minnesota and Detroit for the top seed in the North. And Minnesota, I think at some point Sam Darnold, the way he's playing, I think at some point that's going to come to an end at the wrong time. Kind of like what Brett Favre did. He get you all up to the door, and then make a critical error in the end. And I think that's what's going to happen to Sam Darnold. But either way, Minnesota is going to be in the playoffs, and that should be a great game Sunday night. But today you got two bowl games. I know Minnesota's playing Virginia Tech tonight, and then you got those two teams from Texas, North Texas and Texas State. The only problem with these bowl games, in both situations, you have players missing, a whole lot of players missing in those games. Virginia Tech is definitely missing a lot of people. and North Texas is in the same boat. So how they can compete early on will determine how that game goes. But both those teams, they're scheduled to lose tonight. But in these bowl games, anything pretty much can happen. But for the most part, they'll go to form. They're going to be kind of like what the experts predict. And unless those players that fill in for the guys that aren't playing or transferred or whatever the reason aren't there, unless they can fill in and play on the same level, then it's going to go just like what the experts pretty much say. Well, those are the two games today, and just looking forward to the AFC North games tomorrow, and a whole lot of action going on. All right, now tonight, like I said, I got basketball game, 7 o'clock tonight. I don't know, the team we're playing, not that great, but if I get a signal, because a lot of times my signal doesn't work, I run that game live just to have a change of pace going on. But should be interesting. But Rod says, what do you think of P.J. Fleck of Minnesota? Is he a good coach? I think he's a good motivator. All those coaches are pretty much the same. I mean, they all follow the same kind of blueprint to get ready for a game. It's just a matter of what mistakes the players are going to make. But Fleck is going to get them motivated to, as he called it, row the boat. And I don't know how long he's going to stay at Minnesota. He hadn't really won any big games to the point where he's in the top echelon of the Big Ten. So I don't think he's going to boat anytime soon. I think this is probably the highest he's going to go with his coaching career. But he's a good coach, but more of a motivator than anything else. But I think that he's not going to get much higher than he may take a parallel job, but I don't think that he's going to go much higher than that. All right, Dub Owens. As a Packers fan, I don't see anyone beating Buffalo. Most complete team out there. I don't think so. I saw Baltimore take them apart at the knees in the regular season. So what makes you think that Buffalo's got that much better that they can't be beaten by Baltimore? I wanted him at Auburn years ago. You talking about Fleck? Well, if he comes back next year and has a good year in Minnesota and Freeze falls on his face, then he might just come to Auburn. You never know. But I just hadn't seen him win the Ohio State and Penn State matchups to make a team like in the SEC take a chance on the Fleck. That doesn't mean he couldn't be a good coach. But the last couple of guys I've seen come down from the Big Ten into the SEC, they didn't do so well. What's that guy from, he went to Mississippi State. He came out of Penn State. And then you had Bielema. He's been in the SEC with Arkansas. And that didn't go so well. That doesn't mean they're not good coaches. It's just, I don't know if he's the right fit for those situations. And it was definitely the case in those two. All right. But Buffalo, yeah, that's a good team. You're going to have to beat Buffalo. But Kansas City seems to have their number. Kansas City's got 1,000 lives. And, Mahomes, when the game is on the line, they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt when it comes to a call. So you got to overcome all of that. And then Kansas City's got home field again. It's going to be tough sledding for Buffalo. But they don't have a bye. And by them having the 2 seed, that's going to be, they better hope it's not Cincinnati, because Cincinnati can play with anybody. So I think what it's going to be is the Broncos or the Dolphins. One of those two are going to get that 7 seed. They can get by them. But then again, Buffalo's always had trouble with Miami. So there's no easy route for Buffalo. They're going to have to play just like everybody else. But I seriously think Pittsburgh is going to the Super Bowl. They're going to get the ship right just enough. They can, even though they got whipped by Kansas City the other day, they weren't at full speed. So there's some things that they can do different from what they did the first time. And it's all about adjustments, man. And every game is going to be different. So I still think that Pittsburgh can beat any team in the AFC. It's just, will they show up to play? Dub says, Buffalo and Baltimore played way back in September. Momentum changes throughout the season. Plus, if they play in the playoff, Baltimore will have to travel. Yeah, but does it really matter an NFL team to travel in the playoffs? And I can see a team like Miami having to go into Green Bay and you can't go to Green Bay in the playoffs, but it will have to be Miami going into Buffalo, where the weather can be really drastic. But how many times have you seen San Francisco or Dallas or the Rams or any other hot weather team go into Green Bay and knock them off? I've seen the Giants do it a couple of times. So there's no guarantee just because you're in a cold weather city that's going to affect you. Now, I mentioned earlier about Cincinnati getting by San Diego with Dan Fouts. The only reason they beat Dan Fouts that day is because of the wind chill factor. They couldn't throw the ball. They didn't have the running game that they needed to get through that round. Tomlin is a great coach, and he's a great motivator, but it comes down to turnovers. Pittsburgh lost the last 2 games. It's all based on turnovers. If they don't turn the ball over against Baltimore, they beat Baltimore. If they don't turn it over against Kansas City, they're right there. Who's the other team they lost to? He lost 3 in a row. But Pittsburgh, they did it all to themselves. They lost earlier to the Cowboys, they lost to the Colts, and they lost to the Browns. Those are 3 bottom-feeding teams. If you just beat them, then you have competition with Kansas City for that top seed. San Francisco beat the Packers and Green Bay all the time in the playoff. Exactly. San Francisco, it gets cool up there, but it ain't Green Bay cold. So the fact that, the reason for that is they can go, these NFL teams, even though I'm from New Orleans, I can fly and practice in Detroit's facilities and practice outside. But just because you're from a warm weather city, that doesn't mean you can't go to another NFL facility and practice there. It happens all the time. And, if it was me, that's what I would do. And, yeah, the Packers have choked a lot. But, odds are spread around. You got to believe that you can't expect to have the same outcome all the time. All the teams, the best teams, don't always win. Something usually happens to them. Now, there's some teams that it don't make no difference what they do. You can't beat them. And you see that every 3 or 4 years, a team that comes along like that. But for the most part, any of these teams that's playing in a playoff game can get beat, and that's on any level, except for high school. Now, high school, you generally, whatever you got, that's what you got. I mean, you can't mix and match. It used to be that way anyway. Now they have all-star teams where they change teams like underwear now, and I really don't think that's high school football, but that's what they're doing now. Besides that, you have to play with what you got. And I think in the NFL, that's much less of an issue. Any of those teams could beat anybody on any game. You turn the ball over, you start making mistakes, you're going to get beat. Don't have a lot of faith in Kansas City this year. Just not lighting up the scoreboard. No, they aren't, but they are playing great defense, and that is why Kansas City has won so many games this year. I think what Kansas City has going against them is fate, the odds of fate. I mean, you've had so much go right for you to win 2 in a row. You can't expect good things to always to continue to happen in your favor. You can't keep beating the same teams all the time the same way. And I think that's what Kansas City's problem is this year. Just fate. And the guy I mentioned earlier about San Francisco, they went to repeat that one time, and they couldn't do it because you had a team that had the belief that they can play with them, and they had just the right momentum and made just enough plays at the right time to beat them. You take Montana's last game in San Francisco, really, when Leonard Marshall knocked him out. He went to throw a pass, and Marshall came up behind him, boom, fumbled the ball. They come down and kick the game-winning kick. Those kind of things happen when things just don't go your way. And when things keep going your way, eventually it's going to backfire. And like you say, Rod, it's going to come to an end for Kansas City at some point. But you still got to beat them. Now, Baltimore, they think they got something to say about that. But like I said before, Kansas City, they got a blueprint for Baltimore. Henry's running the ball. You see what Jackson is doing. They got those wily old defensive coordinators, somebody that thinks like me, and they look at the changes that Baltimore is making, and they say, that's what you're doing now, right? Okay, let me start working on me a game plan right now. And if I happen to play you during the season, I'm going to throw some things at you, and then you're going to adjust to that. I'm going to see how you do that, and I'm going to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to make some adjustments, and I'm going to change this, and I'm going to mix it up with that. So by the time I see you in the playoffs, all that running around you doing, and all those greatnesses everybody's bestowing on you, you're going to have to show me that in the playoffs, because I'm not convinced that you can do it. So besides Baltimore, the one thing that Jackson has in his favor, if you got a guy that can shoot a rifle and he hits his target half the time, do you really want to be in the crosshairs of this guy that can shoot half the time? At some point, he's going to hit you. And if Jackson has time to get in there and throw the football, at some point, he's going to make some plays downfield. And then Baltimore becomes dangerous then. But the question is, when will he do it? That's all I want to know. So until Baltimore wins the championship, they are gatekeepers at best. Not saying they can't go further, but they haven't proven it. Well, this is what I'm saying all the time. You have to stand in there and throw the football, and I don't care how great you can run, and I don't care how many games or awards you won. When the game is on the line, you got to be able to run the football as a running back or as a team, and you also have to stand in there and throw the football at the right time. Can Jackson do it? It's going to take for Derrick Henry to get off. If Henry is off, then that opens the door for Lamar Jackson to be effective. But the first thing you got to do is stop the run between the tackles, and that's what Kansas City did last year, and they're going to do the same thing this year, and it's going to come down to, can Jackson make a play? And if he wants to advance, he's going to have to make a play. It's just that simple. And I don't know. I'm not saying he can't do it, but I don't know if he can do it. Balance, balance, and balance. You are correct. But again, you take the thing that a team does best away from them. And it's not Jackson that is the best for the Ravens. It's running between the tackles with Derrick Henry. Now, you saw what he was doing earlier in the year. It goes back to the point of when you standing up in the shotgun. They were actually having the guy stand up in the shotgun and take the handoff. That wasn't so effective. It's only when he lines up on the center that makes all the difference. And when he started lining up and running under center, then they started to become more effective. They lost their first 2 games. And they can be beat again. Their defense is playing a little bit better, but then I don't know if that's against the competition they've been playing. Now, the Browns lit them up the first time. If the Browns light them up again, that's not a good sign for the Ravens. So we'll see how it all goes, man. But I just wanted to come on and talk about the buys in these playoffs, and overall, I don't think they are good, especially in college when you got to sit around for 3 weeks. Now, a week and a half, 2 weeks at the most, yeah, I can deal with that. But 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, that's no good. It was almost like Oregon had never played football before. That's the way they looked anyway, and it absolutely killed them. Same thing with Arizona State. Boise State struggled, and Texas getting by Arizona State was heartbreaking in a lot of ways, because if they're going to have a targeting call, that was truly a targeting call, and they sit there and said that it was not targeting. The man clearly hit the man in the head, and if that wasn't targeting, then you get rid of the whole rule. All right, at some point you have to be able to beat someone with your left hand. Well, if you're not a left-handed quarterback, why you have to have a left hand if you're a right-handed quarterback? So I don't know. I don't know how that's how to help them. I don't know. But I think whatever it is, people say this is high entertainment, and the outcomes are already determined. I hate to think that that's true. Knowing that how football games go, that's kind of hard to believe. But you can affect something like the calls, like the Arizona State targeting thing. It's a perfect example. The officials made a determination. If that was correctly called, then Arizona State would have won that game in regulation. But it wasn't meant to be. And maybe it goes back to what Cam Newton said about people not wanting to see Arizona, not wanting to see Notre Dame. Maybe they didn't want to see Arizona State. Texas has a more sexier name to it, more of a sexier history. So maybe people would rather see a team with some kind of name or brand, as opposed to Arizona State, who's had 3 straight losing seasons. But I don't think it matters. If you earn your way to a position and you're the better team, then who cares what people want to see? Is who earns that position, and that's just the way it should be, based on merit. But that's just my opinion. But I appreciate you guys sitting and chiming in with me. I actually got to get up and do a little basketball tonight. I already mentioned that. Maybe I can run it live for you, just to have you a diversion. I don't think it's going to be that great of a game, but a win is a win, and we'll take it if we can get it. But then again, high school, you never know. That same team that you think you're going to beat might just come in and shoot 80% and run you out your own building. It can happen. I've seen it before. But I'm going to come back in tomorrow, right before the AFC Championship games. We're going to talk a little football, man. Not the AFC Championship, but the AFC North games tomorrow afternoon. And we're going to talk a little football before I get bedded down again with basketball. But just something to do. So wherever you guys are, I appreciate you guys chiming in with me. Rob Montgomery, appreciate it. Dubs, you guys have a great day. Hope you guys subscribe and hit the like button, man. I greatly appreciate it. And until next time, this has been Sports for Real. I'm out.